here, but he wanted to be here, and he sent one anecdote to share with you. In one of our trips to Japan, we were staying at the Hotel Okura, and Praveen has a very interesting and very intellectual humor. And we were just having a nice meal and all that, and one of the things he told me is, oh, do you know that in Indian Airlines, they give you a really good meal in first class, and they give you an empty bowl in coach so you can go beg in first class. I said, no, I didn't know that. It's of course not. So he kept telling me stories, and one of them he said, there's a story about this American who was on Japan Airlines, and they served him, he requested chicken, and they brought him this roasted chicken. And this American started eating the chicken, and it was really tough. So he called the stewardess and said to the stewardess, this chicken is very rubbery. And the stewardess said, what, sir? This chicken is very rubbery. He said, oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Because she thought she said it was lovely. I said, Ravi, that's a great opportunity. You're eating chicken. Let's try it here in the hotel. Praveen said, no. I said, try it, Praveen. If you were telling the story, he will tell you that I forced it. It might have been right. But
I think you forced
he literally called the waitress. Okay? He was having chicken. So Praveen, he tried to put on his best serious face. And he goes, and he says, this chicken is very rubbery. And the guy looked at him and said, sorry, sir? This chicken is very rubbery. And the guy literally said, oh, thank you very much.
Proof of the deviousness. Right there.
No, he was just there. We do a lot of work with our ETC Engineering Trade Center. And we have 500 engineers there. They do a lot of work for the US. They do 60% work of the US, other 30% for China. They do about other 9% for Europe. And of the 500 guys, we have 6 guys, right? The 1%. But we talk to them a lot, and the salespeople write them a lot. And there is a lot of communication problems because, we're Spanish talking English, they're Chinese talking English. There's a lot of communication problems, right? So sometimes the salesman write and copy me and write to some one of us associates there and says, this X in the model number is cooling only or heat pump? And they say yes. So you go back and yes, cooling only or yes, heat pump? They go yes. And then you say, so which is it? Which one is it? Yes. So finally Jaime decided, no, we're gonna get somebody, right, that's gonna be our representative down there. And we were all great. It's a great idea. Yes,
Yes.
So we wrote a description. They hired somebody. Big in the description was he must be multicultural, English-speaking person, right? So multicultural, we meant like he's been with maybe in college was with Spanish peers or English peers or something like that, right? So they hired him, and we flew in January. We flew to see him. So he's an engineer with a master's degree in heat exchangers and a PhD in some nanotechnology. I mean, he's a really smart guy. But sometimes really smart guys, they're so smart, they cross the boundary, and they are like not smart. And so one Tom, his name was Tom 1. But everybody called him One Tom. And we're like, this is One Tom. Okay, so we went to meet him at the building, and he was a Chinese guy. He was a really tall guy, like a really tall Chinese guy. And we were like, is your dad or your mom like an American or anything like that? No, my dad is from the Han people who are really tall people. So it's a mix from the Han and the Qing dynasty. So that was a multiculturality. That was the multiculturality. Okay. So and he was very timid, and he didn't speak a lot of English. But we wanted to go to his restaurant that we went before, and we asked him to do a reservation, and he did. He helped us with that. So we took 2 taxis. One Tom was with me, and Jaime went with the other guys from the ETC. Okay, so Juan Tom and Ricardo and me went to this place, and it was a really bad neighborhood, and you know it's a rough neighborhood when you enter, and like it's really dirty, and the window units outside, and they have a laundry room that looks really, really bad. And we went to the lobby, and he said, well, we're here, and we were like, this is not the restaurant. And he says, yes, I did the reservation, it is here. And so Jaime calls and he says, we're at the place. Where are you guys? And he said, we're at this building, but we don't see you outside. In the meantime, some of these bike gangs from China come in. You know, bike gangs is people in bikes, but they have sandals and, and it's like scooters, and they were stopping in front of the building and pointing at us. I was like, "What? Are you sure this is here?" I said, "Yes, I made the reservation." So Jaime says, "We're at the building. It's in the barn, which is a really nice area." And so Jaime gives the phone to the taxi driver, and he speaks to Juan Tom, okay? And Juan Tom, you look at his body language, is like, whoa. And also he goes, oh! And Ricardo goes, Juan Tom! So we waited for the taxi and all that. In the meantime, they went into the restaurant, they started talking to a waiter. Comes out the waiter. The waiter speaks English, but he also speaks Spanish. Really good Spanish, and he's funny. He's a nice guy, and in the meantime, we finally got a taxi, got back to the restaurant. The dinner was for Juan Tom, but we want to know Juan Tom, but he was really timid. So we left. And I was in the taxi with Jaime, and after all this happened, we were like really, thinking, and I just said, Jaime? Hey, Jaime, don't say it. Jaime? No. Don't say it. So after a while I said, Jaime, what? Can we hire the waiter? And then one time did it.
Give me a break, man. You gave me a hard time for potentially being a hippie.
That's right. I confess. It's my Midwest. Oh, you're from the Midwest?
Yeah, exactly. And yes, it's true that all of these dudes have got the same navy blazer and the same khaki pants and the same light blue shirt. And yes, the classiest group I've ever worked with, morally straight, has turned that off. Seriously, turn it off. They're going to.
I'm afraid somebody else will. There are a lot of people that are not here. Some have passed on, and some are ill. I don't know how many of you remember Steve Krogleski. He was one of my students at Viterbo. Train was looking for people, and he came to me and said, I'm not an MBA, but do you think I could apply for this job at Train? They're looking for somebody for their MBA group, but I don't have an MBA. I said, go for it. What's the worst that can happen? You practice your interview. He said, okay, I'm going. About a month later, I was at Viterbo for the awards. They had all of the teachers, all the professors in gowns and caps and the whole 9 yards. And then we all sit in the auditorium and they bring the students out to give them their awards. Well, the final award was the Supreme Award of the school, and it was being given to a young man who had done a 5-year business degree, who had gotten an A in every class except for one. And out walked Steve, who had gotten a B+ in my science. And I felt about that big. Shortly after that, I found out he'd gotten the job, and he would be going overseas somewhere. And I know that he went to Hong Kong. I don't know where else he went. Yeah. And I know that he was well liked. So Rob asked me to try and track him down. He has Lewy body dementia, and his father doesn't think that he would recognize any of us. He's been married less than 5 years, and he's somewhere in northern Wisconsin. I'd just like to ask for prayer for him. Everything that I've read doesn't really give much hope, and I know he's not yet 60. And I didn't think he should be forgotten. I wanted to remember. It's not a funny story by any means, but I don't want to forget those who are with us.
I often do dance at parties, but not at that club. But I will not disclose the name of the person who was dancing on the floor. But I do know that he was invited to this meeting and he decided not to come. Because he was afraid that one heart would see something.
I never been invited to dance with him.
What I want to talk to you about is a good friend of ours that was mentioned in our discussions yesterday, and that's Bill O'Connor. And I remember he came from the Denver office, and at the time they were trying to convert distributors into sales offices, and we need somebody who had experience in the sales office and service and all that. So he was, a good acquisition for international group. So I was hosting him, he came in, and then on the first trip, then about 3 weeks later, we said, let's make our first trip to Asia so you get an idea of what's going on and what we need and all that. So anyway, and we were put on some seminars throughout the Far East, and I think we started Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and I think we went Thailand and all the way down to Indonesia. And then he met a lot of people and he saw the needs and all that. Anyway, we got back to La Crosse and he says, George, this is the best trip of my life. It's wonderful. So I said, well, yeah, you have another opportunity. So anyway, after that, a few weeks later, and by the way, he loved to travel. Jeannie's not here right now, so I can say he loved to travel, and Jeannie would complain about he traveled too much, But we even made jokes about he likes to collect the little houses from KLM. he hadn't completed his collection. So, but that was a joke we made about that. But anyway, he goes on the next trip, and then he's on his own. And he calls me from where it was, it could have been Hong Kong. He says, George, you can't believe this. I'm on the best trip of my life. So I said, okay. And of course, we all shared about the idea that, hey, Bill O'Connor just went, he went his best trip. Anyway, 5 trips in a row, he called me and says, this is the best trip of my life. and of course, we shared that, and we all had a good laugh. Bill had another best trip of his life. But then I started reflecting, and I said, you know what? We have all experienced it. How many best trips of our life have we had? And I remember details about it. For example, going to see Boonsong in Thailand, and we became part of his family. Jim and I did. To the point that important things in their personal life, we got invited, and we went to his funeral. Another trip I remember was 1973, and for yours, complaints I talked too much about history, but Bangladesh became a country in 1971. It was a very poor country, and in fact, I think Henry Kissinger put in some comment he made about that time that, you know, the new country Bangladesh is the basket case of the world. Very poor. Anyway, I was in Singapore. I went there the first trip to any train got to Bangladesh. And the reason we went is because some guy from Bangladesh called us and he said, "Could I have a duckulator?" Remember the old duckulator? Yeah. So I was going to go actually see if we wanted to be a distributor. So I arrived there, and he showed me around Dhaka. He picked me up at the airport, and he took me to the shop, and his staff had no shoes on. So then he made a trip to Singapore, and he just marveled by tall buildings. He'd never seen tall buildings in his life. And it was always very primitive. As a gee, how are we going to make this thing work? But he had a really good attitude. He was an engineer. He graduated from the agricultural college in Bangladesh, and he found some old equipment that was hanging around when it was East Pakistan. They had separated East Pakistan and Pakistan. And I want to give you the historical part of how it happened, because that's a long story. And and I realized in my trip that they really couldn't do business because there was no money in the country, and very few businesses were prospering, and they just, you know, they almost like worked for meals or something. And if you had a project, there was no foreign currency available because the country was so poor. So the only things you could do to import products is to go through the government. The government is going to have to approve the foreign exchange and all that. But a year and a half later, the airport of Dhaka was going to be built, a new modern airport, because they wanted to make access to international travelers and businessmen especially. And we ended up sending centrifugals for that. And so it was and it was a unique product because it didn't have the problem of installation, and you had clean water in the right place and all that to be able to use it. It was water cooled, so air cooled centrifugals. And then he got all the big projects for a couple of years, and get quick financing. Nobody else was doing business there. So these are the kind of things that we experienced. And I thought, I mean, experiencing something like that, I said, that's a pretty good trip. But we've all had those wonderful trips. And if I think back, I also had a lot of best trips in my life, yeah. And but what's interesting, some of those best trips are these meetings too. How many seminars we had?
There were some bad ones too. Meetings with Kirkham were not fun.
Yeah, that was difficult. But I mean, when we solved those problems, there was a lot of pride, and so yes, Bill was right. There are many best trips in our life.
John Kirkham was a former carrier partner with ours in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei. The family and I moved to Penang, Malaysia in 1990, and I started running the engineering and new product development because we had to design stuff that wasn't designed for Scranton, Pennsylvania. We design it for Southeast Asia. By 1994, Kirkham's organization was 75% of our business. And we had gone from 1 shift, 2 shifts, we were now working 3 shifts. But quality had, as the volume went up, the quality was going down. And Bud Ross was my boss. He called me in one day around August, early August, and said, hey, Rob Canizares is gonna start a Hong Kong headquarters for Asia. I'm moving there. Are you interested in taking over? I said, yeah. He goes, well, you have to go with me to Singapore because Rob and Bill Klug are flying in to meet with John Kirkham and his country leaders to talk about the poor quality of product coming out of Hong Kong. So we flew in that evening after work, and the next morning, Rob grabs me and we go to a separate table, and he starts the interview process, which then continued through coffee breaks and through lunch. And he's telling me what a wonderful opportunity it would be to run Penang. And at the same time, Kirkham's guys are just hammering us about poor quality. And then about 2 o'clock that afternoon, Bill Klug looks down the row, because it was Bill, Rob, Bud, me. And then Bill Klug, if any of you knew him, you know, boys, I think we ought to just shut this factory down. And I'm trying to reconcile that with a wonderful opportunity. And Rob kept telling me, don't worry. So we leave, and Rob says, I'm headed back to the States. I'm going to interview some more people, and I'll let you know. Okay. Weeks go by. Bud's coming in my office almost every day going, have you heard from Rob? Have you heard from Rob? No, I haven't heard from Rob. And then, for those of you who went on the train budget death march in Asia every year in the fall, so we come through, there was a business review, and what's the budget going to be like for next year? And Bud and I each drove our cars to the airport, picked up the team that flew in that afternoon, went to the hotel, and everybody's checking in, and Rob says to Bud and me, you two guys come with me to my room. So we get up there, and Rob looks at Bud and me, and he goes, well, the vote was unanimous. Jim, you're the new managing director for Train Malaysia. And I'm thinking vote, and Bud goes, vote? Who voted? And Rob says, well, I looked in the mirror, I put up both my arms, I was scared enough.
It was a good decision.
Well, not all of you, because some of you aren't that old. But you know, the interesting thing about sharing some, many stories about something that happened 45-ish years ago. You got to question the accuracy, maybe, and did the storyteller tell it right, et cetera, et cetera. But believe me, this is 4 little snapshots of our first expat experience in Vietnam. All right. So in the fall of 1980, there we go, 3 kids in tow and Patty and I. When we get there, we've got a nice rental house out just to the east of Gull Bay. For those of you who have been there, and we were in the boundaries of Chusei. It was a small village. Nice little rental house. You get in the rental house, no telephone line, because the person who lived there before us moved and took it with them. It's an infrastructure issue. We waited 18 months without a telephone line in that home. So what does that mean? Well, you can't talk on the telephone. This is before the cell phones, and every time we wanted to call home to lacrosse, our parents and anybody else, it was weekends in the PTT, Post Telegraph Telephone Building downtown Ebbinau, and in the pay booth. So it was rather inconvenient. That just something that you know we've always talked about it, not forget. When I was there, when I arrived at the end of '80, there were 3 other expat families. Press and Nancy Clayton were still there. Those of you who remember Press and Nancy. Pat and Debbie Gannard, and of course Rob and Gail. And Gannard's had arrived, I don't know, 80s or 78 maybe, or something like that. And he was in charge of excess expat furniture and appliances. So, you know, we had plenty of help buying our furniture for the home and whatnot. That was not a problem, but there apparently was an expat television available. It wasn't being used by one of the expat families. So, you know, it got to the point of, called up, I wish Pat and Debbie were here, you know, so I could kind of jab at them. You know, got a couple of things on them. But for those of you who don't know Pat and Debbie, wonderful people. I don't know when he left. What year did Patrick leave?
Leave
in
training?
The 80s? Leave training.
He came back to an assignment in La Crosse, and then he went to.
Yeah, but so what year was
I think
that?
roughly 1984 per my discussion. Because he left 84, John Sharp was 84 to 86. Train house was empty till 87, and we lived in the house at 87.
Yeah, but when did he leave train?
When did he leave
He
train?
was here just for a couple of years. And then he left.
Yeah, so mid-80s, you know, the Ganners left, so probably a lot of people here don't know Pat and Debbie.
Yeah, he probably left train.
Yeah, anyway, so we were gonna go out, we needed to find this extra TV. Well, it turned out that Robert Drew, and what was Drew's wife's name? Denise. They were not expats, but they had the extra TV. So Patrick and I get in the car and run over there, and it was about supper time one evening. And we knocked on the door, and you know, Drew answered the phone, or answered the door, let us in, and the TV was on, and they were watching it and eating dinner, and Patrick walks up to the wall and unplugs that TV, and myself and Patrick is take it out, you know, lift it out of there and start. You know, I felt bad.
Not too bad.
Yeah, but not too bad. No, that's correct. Okay, Gail. 1981 Thanksgiving. Do you remember what happened?
I don't, that too many things happened, and I'm afraid to know which one you remember.
Well, who was over at the house? It was Patty and I, and it was probably the Gannards. Was there anybody else? Maybe, I don't remember.
Henri and,
Anyway, we had turkey, and for those
oh,
of you,
your house.
no, your house.
My house.
Your
I've got a
house.
story about your house. Not about my house.
Your house. We had turkey, so she bought the turkey, and she had to pluck the feathers off and everything else.
No. Not that bad.
Do you remember how that turkey was cooked?
Yes.
It must have been poorly.
Raw.
No. In order to, I typically had 17 people at a time for dinner for Thanksgiving every time I did it. And my oven was about this big, which was kind of okay because the turkeys weren't quite that big. Okay? So for 17 people, I figured out I needed 4 turkeys. Okay? But a turkey takes a long time to cook. So what I never made anybody sick.
Nobody got sick.
I cooked 1 turkey on the day before the party. I cooked another turkey, and that one was cooked almost all the way. It went back in the refrigerator. And then the second turkey was cooked very early in the morning, and it was cooked nearly done and sat wrapped in a blanket on top of my furnace. And then the third turkey was cooked nearly done, and the fourth turkey was cooked all the way. So I served the fourth one first, and then The one from the refrigerator, the one from the furnace went in and was served second, and then the third one, and then the one out of the refrigerator went last.
Great memory.
I never put any stuffing in it. Honest. Nobody ever got sick.
Now, this is
And I
45
only
years
realized
ago.
later that this was
Remember,
dangerous.
your memory may be cloudy, I don't know. And I'm just picking at you because you're an excellent cook. I mean, we
More
just remember
turkeys
that.
in the
All right, the last little pick here is, again, involving the Gantards. It was Memorial Day, appropriate because day after tomorrow is Memorial Day. You know, many of you know there's a beautiful American cemetery from the World Wars in Epinal. Beautiful place. And expats were invited to take part in the ceremony. Pat Gantard, that particular morning, was asked to give the prayer. And I'll never forget this. He got up to the podium and very piously and started out, "Let us play." That's a fact.
And then a year later, they invited me to translate the general from American general who came down for this. He spoke English, and I did it in French. And my French is pretty good, but I made one important mistake. I joined two words. When he said the heroes, I should have said les héros. I said les héros. And that changes the word from a hero to a zero. 400 people laughed.
That was your anecdote.
That was my mistake.
So, I was going to tell a funny travel story, and it's fun. I'm going to do something different. I think we should recognize the spouses that followed us all around, and I know I was so appreciative for Janice and all that she put up with, and Gail, it's fun to hear your story. So I want to put Janice on the spot, and then I'm going to ask her to give one of our anecdotes about being a mom as an expat, in this case, I warned her, in China.
Yeah, he did. And I had to give a lot of thought. But this is not particularly funny, but it goes back to the women, the wives, and the family that is Train International Group. We had, it was 1998, we moved from Amsterdam to Shanghai. I had a 3-month-old and a 20-month-old. So, nice flight, right? We get to Shanghai. We also had Dean's mom, who was our nanny. So, whole nuclear family going to Shanghai. And this is 1998. When you look out the high-rises in Shanghai, they're just building high-rises. So at night, it's black. There's nothing out there. And so I'll get back to that later. So we're there. First week, my mother-in-law is helping with the kids. I'm running around Shanghai trying to set up this apartment. We were supposed to be there 3 months, so we didn't bring anything but clothes. And it's about 5 days in, and our son had been a little bit sick taking antibiotics on the plane, but he was all better now, running around, so all was good. I come home one day, and my daughter is not breathing right. And I looked at my mother-in-law and I said, well, how long has this been happening? And she said, a few hours. And we didn't have cell phones, right, so she couldn't get a hold of me. And we had a medical center in the first floor of Shanghai Towers, which was hooked up. If anybody's been in Shanghai, the Portman, the Ritz-Carlton, we lived next door.
We weren't roughing it.
No, we weren't. So we ran down to the medical center, and this little 3-month-old little girl is having a really hard time breathing, and I'm freaking out a little bit. Dean's at the office, of course, and the doctor says to me, "What's your evacuation insurance?" I said, "What?" And he said, "What is your evacuation insurance?" I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And he said, "Call your husband." So I don't even know how we knew to get a hold of you, in the office, but I called him and I'm freaking out at this point. I said, they're asking me about evacuation insurance. I don't know what they're talking about, because in Amsterdam, you don't need that stuff, right? And so his whole office kicks into gear. In the meantime, we're shipped down to the new Pudong Children's Hospital. It was just opening. Great, right? Well, it wasn't really open. And in China, when you go to the hospital, you're supposed to bring food, supplies, linens, things like that, none of which we knew. And there was one doctor who spoke English. And so nobody knew what was going on. It was a night of pure hell. And Dean and I were freaking out, I would say, is a pretty good word for it. They don't know what to do to my daughter. I'm holding an adult-size oxygen mask to her face. And we had to take shifts because I'm falling asleep, and they didn't have one small enough for a baby. These people walked in from the evacuation insurance, or the evacuation company.
They flew a jet.
So they fly a jet from Hong Kong to Shanghai. So it took almost 24 hours for them to get to us. And English-speaking British people, nurses, doctors, okay, we got you now. And oh my gosh, I never felt so great in my life. And so then they said, but he can't fly on the plane. Only one of you can go with the baby. And I'm like, wait, this can't happen. So they actually squeezed Dean onto the plane as well. We fly to Hong Kong. Meanwhile, the people in Hong Kong are telling us, do not go to a public Chinese hospital. Yeah. Right? And who was in the Adventist hospital that had surgery? You were, yes. So, we're these normal, we can go to any hospital. No, you go to Adventist hospital. And so we pulled in there, and the doctors were stellar, and everything was stellar. And we got through the first night, and the doctor was so kind to my daughter. So they're letting us sleep in her room. And the first thing I noticed when we look out the windows is there's lights everywhere in Hong Kong. It's midnight, but it's like the middle of the day. There's lights everywhere, which was so different to me. And the next morning, these women from the Hong Kong office, who I didn't know, we didn't work there, we knew none of them. They brought me coffee because you couldn't get caffeine in an Adventist hospital. And they knew I'd need some caffeine. And they brought us coffee, they brought us snacks, they brought us things. And then they said, you guys go take a shower. We'll sit with the baby. Because they knew we wouldn't leave.
And she was fine.
And those women, they stuck by us all week. And everything was fine after a couple days. But that's what I mean by this family. They didn't even know us. And they supported us through all of that. And it was, it's something that I'll always remember.
So, a lot of folks would say, we're going home, and Janice was quite the trooper and said, no, this is an opportunity of a lifetime, and we continued on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
One of them was that when we went to Hong Kong, we were very religious attendants of Southern Baptist Church, where we went, very involved in the church. And our kids from a very young age, they came to church with us every Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesdays. So they're raised, knowing a lot about the Bible. And when we came to Asia, one of the trips that we took, it was a sales seminar that we were preparing to go to, and we were in Bangkok, and we went on a tour. And we went to some temples in the area, and during the tour they were explaining about Buddha and so on, and the traditions and so on, and the guide was a Thai, really nice Thai person who's giving the tour, and Lana, our oldest child, she's 7 years old I think at the time, or 7 or 8. Oh, she's 5? Okay, 5, so even younger than I thought. She starts to explain that we don't worship idols, and that this is wrong, and that they should know about Jesus. And I'm going, ooh. Okay. But
She didn't suck that out of her thumb.
no. But it was a little embarrassing, but I was proud of her. You know, obviously, I learned, Sunday school lessons. Yeah. So that's one that I can remember. Another time I've shared with a couple people. Wade Smith was traveling around Asia with me. He was working on this mini split project. And Wade, if you know Wade, he's not an easy person to deal with. He's pretty demanding, very pushy. And he hated the Asian food. I mean, he was downright offensive. You know, when we go to a restaurant, and he was very picky and didn't like what they had to serve. Well, during Thanksgiving, another Thanksgiving story, we had several people come over, and Wade was one of the people that came to our Thanksgiving, and he was really grateful for this Thanksgiving. I mean, he was like, oh, this is great. I missed good old meat and potatoes, you know, turkey and dressing and the whole fixing and stuff. And of course, like most expats, we had a ama who was from the Philippines. She was Ellie, and when we came back to the States, for a long time, we would just call out Ellie, and Ellie was gone. But anyway, Ellie, you know, helped prepare the meal with Janet and was working around as a helper. And Wade asked me, he goes, why do you have an ama? What's an ama do for you? And I said, well, she helps, you know, around the house. She can watch the kids. She can clean. You know, she works 6 days a week, and she's just a really great help for Janet. And Wade goes, in his most politically correct way, he says, what do you have a wife for?
That's weird. I was supposed to go to Bangalore. Talal was working in India, setting up these new sales offices. I think he had set up Mumbai and maybe Delhi, but anyway, Bangalore, where they do all the software development, was where I was supposed to go. So it's a big meeting in Cebu. I get on the airplane and I go, I'm headed to Bangalore. I think we went through Hong Kong. I get on an Air India flight in Hong Kong to go to Delhi. And some of you flown Air India, that's an interesting experience. But anyway, so I'm on my Air India flight to Delhi. I open up my passport and say, yeah, I guess you need visas to get into India. I have one. I look at it, I say, this thing's expired 15 days ago. This is going to be fun. So I get off the airplane in Delhi, and I get in the line, and I hand the lady my passport. She looks at it, she says, looks at me twice. I said, there's a 30-day grace period, and this is not a problem. She said, you need to go back. I said, no, it's okay. There's 30 days grace. She says, it's expired. Yeah, but I said, there's 30-day grace period. And so this argument went on a couple times, and finally she says, speak to my supervisor over there. So the supervisor looks at me, and he's an older, wise guy, and he says to me, how could this happen? What did you do? I said, well, I need to go to Bangalore. He said, you need to go back. I said, no, really, I have this meeting in Bangalore. Talal expects me. And so he takes one of these pieces of paper that looks like an AVO, and he writes on it some note, and he says, give me your passport. So I give him my passport, and he calls an assistant over, and I said, he says to assistant, take this man over to buy a ticket from Delhi back to Hong Kong. And I said, but I'm flying out of Bangalore to Hong Kong. He says, no, you're coming back here to get your passport. I said, oh. So this assistant takes me into the bowels of the Delhi airport. We get a ticket for me to fly from Delhi back to Hong Kong. He keeps my passport. I get on the airplane. I get to Bangalore. We open the office, and I think Bill O'Connor was probably there, so this is a big deal. But I said, first when I get to Bangalore, I said, Talal, I need to go and get a ticket from Bangalore back to Delhi. He said, why? I thought you were going from Bangalore to Hong Kong. And I said I was, but now I need to go back to Delhi. So we open the office in Bangalore. I fly back to Delhi.
And I think there was overnight in Delhi. I go to the American Airlines, probably North American Airlines, anyway, one of the American Airlines to fly to Hong Kong. So I present my ticket, and the ticket agent looks at me and he says, "So your passport?" I said, "No, my passport is here in the Delhi airport." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, here's this AVO." So I show him this piece of paper. He said, "Oh, okay, so we need to find your passport." Okay, so then this is a journey through the Delhi airport. So we go into the bowels of the Delhi airport, and we get to this desk with, this is not a racial comment, but there's a fat Indian next in a big gray desk. And he opens up the left-hand drawer and he pulls out a stack of passports. He goes through this stack, no permanent passport. Second stack, no permanent passport. Third, no permanent passport. I'm saying, this is getting to be a problem. So we go then further in the bowels of the Delhi airport. Another big gray desk, fat Indian, same deal. 3 stacks, passport, no permanent passport. I'm starting to really get nervous, okay? So we go further into the bowels of the Delhi airport, and another fat Indian behind a gray desk pulls open left-hand drawer. First stack, no passport. Second stack, he comes into Furman's passport. It worked great. So he lays on the desk, I grab for the passport, and these hands, slap me, he says, "Wait." So, okay. Then he goes into the right-hand drawer, and he pulls out this huge ledger, big ledger, 5 carbons in this ledger. He opens it up. He takes my passport, he writes on the number, "Sign here." So I sign that I get my passport, grab my passport, and then the American Airlines guy takes me back to the ticket counter, and I fly out of India. So that's the anecdote. My wife says, "You shouldn't tell that because it was really dumb and stupid," I said, but that's what some anecdotes are. So anyway.
When I first went to India, I was carrying the video camera with me. In those days, those video cameras were big, and I said, "Yeah, so I said, "What about this?" I said, "Yeah, it's my video camera. Where is the receipt?" I give them the receipt and so on. So he lost it in my passport. Coming in with a video camera. A month later, I planned to go to see the distributor in Sri Lanka. So I go to the airport, and we're there, and I go to the counter. "This is my passport." I said, "Where's the video camera?" I said, "It's at home." "What do you mean it's at home?" "You have, every time you go out, you have to take it out with you." So I said, "Are you serious?" And I'll be going in and out, every time to Bangladesh, everywhere else. So, well, no, sorry, that's the rule. Anyway, luckily I had about 3 hours before my flight. So this thing went all the way up to the Deputy Commissioner of Customs to sign the waiver so that I can go out without them.
At the time I was requested to put this in writing so that it could be reproduced, so to speak. So I wrote it down, so I sake of time I ask you to endure my reading it. So one of the scariest experiences at TIG occurred during a management meeting at Chiang Mai, Thailand.
You were there. Yeah.
We were there.
I heard about it. We smoked a lot of grass.
Yeah. Be careful what you say to me. But as an extracurricular event, we were offered a ride atop an elephant, secured only in a coarsely woven bucket seat for the car guys contraption strapped to the back of the elephant. Each elephant was guided by a Mahut who sat cross-legged atop the elephant's head. Remember?
Yep, Mahout.
All of this was fine until I discovered that we were headed up a very narrow path that wended its way up to the mountainside. Though we were progressing single file at what seemed like a painstakingly slow pace, it was not long when thrust from side to side in my bucket seat on the back of the elephant, I could peer down
Oh,
on
no
the
way.
side, the narrow path, directly down. I really don't know how far it was because I couldn't see the bottom. But it was at least 100 feet, because that's basically the height of Cambridge Bluff, thereabouts. But it could have well been 1,000 feet, because it was a mountain. I mean, it was not a bluff, it was a mountain. It was positively terrifying.
That's how we build character.
I could only conjure up an image of my elephant missing a step, and me and the Mahout and our elephant tumbling straight down the mountainside. It seemed like it took forever to reach the summit. We did reach it.
It's almost building the elephant.
That was good. Oh my God.
I have actually two anecdotes. William, we can film the first.
Okay.
The first one has to do, we were editing a brand label program with Samuel for cassette mini split units. Those are the units that mount on the ceiling, or the indoor unit. Well, we had gone through a number of meetings. We talked about what models we wanted to source, what was the badging requirements, what type of ship with literature we want included. One of the final meetings was to present our final forecast. So I put together a forecast month on month for the next year. And UQG, our manager at the Tokyo office, was with me. So we meet with Sanyo and we talk a little bit about some of the other issues, and then it was time to present the forecast. So I gave him the spreadsheet. And our Sanyo guy looked at it, looked at it some more. I'm thinking, uh-oh. And I just said, is this something that Sanyo can manage? He said, yeah, we can manage it. In fact, we can produce your total annual requirements in one afternoon. You know, reflecting later, I figured out why it took so long. He was looking at that spreadsheet and trying to decide, do I laugh or cry?
I think this all goes back to the early 1950s. And at that time, Trane was on a rocket sled of market in the United States. It was growing extremely fast. It was developing new products for that market. The people that ran the company were focused on that market. Over the transom came orders, not for that market, but we want that product, and we want to use it in, pick a country, Egypt. And so a salesman might have seen that fly over the transom. They rarely came to headquarters, they came to a sales office. And some commission-driven salesman says, well, this is easy. I can just sell this thing, never see it again, no problem. And so we had those kinds of sales, less than $1 million worth of sales. Over the transom, not really selling, order taking. At about the same time, we had a lawyer in the company who had some international tilt to his head because he was in the Second World War and spent time afterwards in some of the countries, named Bob Yeoman.
Yeah.
Yeoman. I'll write it down afterwards.
Please.
We also had the chairman of the board, who had been the president for about 15 years, who had some international bent by virtue of where he went to school and who he palled around with. They said, wait a minute, instead of having it come over the transom, could we not purposely go after that business? So Bob Yeoman and Don Mine, who went to your university, by the way,
Iowa State, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so, with Iowa, said, let's go after this. But before they went after it, another bird flew over the transom, and it was the opportunity to do a joint venture with Air Liquide in France, in a factory in the northeast part of France, near Epinal. And so we took a minority position. The singular product I mentioned on the bus ride yesterday was brazed aluminum. They were in the air reduction business. We were in the heat exchanger business. This put them ahead of their competition. So we had a minority interest in that factory and Bob Yeoman, now international vice president, went and lived in Epinal and coordinated that joint venture. When he came back, Don was looking at these other orders for regular products coming in over the transom and said, Bob, why don't you organize so that we can go after that? The problems were all of our competition had a position in those markets already because they had other products that they had been selling in those markets. Carrier sold refrigeration, York sold refrigeration since, Christ was a pup. And Westinghouse and General Electric came in through the appliance part of that. They had distribution, they had presence in these markets. So what do? The smart thing is to poach people from those companies. The first poachee, yeah, we're the poacher, was Bill Woodward. And his marketing sales model, sales structure model was
don't move too much.
The recording, the wide angle doesn't get
Yeah.
it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so anyway.
No, that's okay. You can move a little, but not too extreme.
You can triangulate.
Yeah.
Okay, here I am.
I don't have a problem with that, Jim. It's okay.
No, but it's the video. The video has it wrong.
He's taking a video. Okay, so anyway, Bill Woodward came from Westinghouse, came into the company. His sales model was to go to a country, explore the country very quickly, find a contractor in our business and make a distributor out of him. Really, these contractors were design build contractors, just like dealers are in the United States right now. Carrier had one, York had one, Westinghouse had one, Dunn-Bush had one, and now Trane comes along, and in the spirit of poaching, we robbed one from somebody else. And so that became our distribution model. That was okay until those markets either were inherently big, inherently big, or were growing to the point where there now were consultants, and now there were independent contractors who were not associated with a brand who wanted to buy from us. So the next step in that development was to either convince the distributor to become only a distributor and service agent and not a contractor, so we could sell to all contractors, or start new, or go there ourselves. The countries in the world were multiple, and the situation in every country was somewhat different. And so it was some mix of having a distributor, a contracting distributor, or a selling distributor, maybe with a service agent. And that's how we got started. To manage all of that, there were two pieces to the organization. One was called a regional manager. George had been a regional manager. who else in the room? Nobody else in the room. They tried to get me to be a regional manager a couple times. Both of us were asked to go to the same place, Nigeria. Anyway,
Oh, no.
we had regional managers. And the rule of thumb was that you could generate $1 million worth of sales, and remember this is a lot of inflation, we would put a regional manager there. The first one came from a competitor, Mason Brown. The second one, were you the second one? Or Antonio?
No, Hans Jorgensen, Antonio was the second.
Antonio was the second one. So Antonio came from General Electric. And then Hans Jorgensen?
Came from General Electric in Venezuela, even though he was Argentine.
Yeah. So that's how we grew these regional managers. Their job was not only to sell, but to give information about the structure of these various markets. And so as we grew, we learned, and as the markets grew, we learned that we had to do more than just distribute. A lot of these countries locked us out unless we manufactured. So we went from joint ventures and wholly owned and unowned distribution only, and we're pushed into doing joint ventures, especially in the larger markets. Thus we had Colex Train, thus we had Kubota Train, Malaysia, Clark, J.L. Clark in South Africa. I think they can hear me.
Okay.
Thanks. And I have a hard time with this. Anyway, and so we marched forward like that. In the meantime, as I mentioned, I think yesterday or the day before, or maybe in the bus, it was very easy for the train management to go to countries where everybody spoke English and they were somewhat, quote, American in their structure. And so quickly, after CMAT, that's the Air Liquide joint venture, we took 100% of that operation and Epinal was formed. Just before that, we purchased a 70,000 square foot factory in Donnybristle, Scotland, where they speak English, sort of, and Scottish.
Some sort of English.
And so we started manufacturing in two places, in Epinal and in Donnybristle. So that got us into wholly owned manufacturing for Europe, for the bigger markets. Kubota Train is a whole different story that I know all too well. Had too many stars, we won't get into that, but Malaysia came along. J.L. Clark in South Africa, J.L. Clark, Lamplow Clark, J. Lamplow Clark, was a schoolmate of Don Miner. And in fact, was one of the drivers of Don understanding the opportunity outside of the United States. With respect to what happened back in headquarters, there was a huge struggle going on. There were two struggles. One is, and this was my struggle, my personal struggle, was somebody in a regional office would say, we need a 50 cycle, blah, 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 blah. The product departments were not set up to handle that question. And so some joker like me had to go over and sit next to their desk and sweet talk them into, oh yeah, going out and buying some 50 hertz motors, et cetera, et cetera. Where we ran into a jam was with direct drive centrifugals, which was our main product line. And that required the train company now not to just have some clerk at a product desk say, well, yeah, we can put a 50 cycle motor on it. Now we're back into engineering, and we begin engineering products that can be sold overseas. And that was the headquarters job. But there was another headquarters job, and that was the fight for attention and the fight for resources. When I went to the train company in 1963, right over here where I showed you, there's a hole in the ground now. Left to right was Don Miner, Frank Hood, who was married to a sister of Reuben. James, some train person. Yeah. Tom Hancock and Al Menke. Hancock and Menke were focused on riding the sled, the jet sled. They could have nothing to do with all this stuff about 50 cycle, this and that, and different signs and different languages. And as I said on the bus, Hancock was rather outspoken about that at certain times when his energies got.
He had some World War II experience.
Yeah, bad World War II experience, exactly. But Don Miner, and to a certain degree, Frank Hood, who was the finance guy, were the pushers of this. Yeomans was the guy out in front, and all of us worked for Yeomans. He sat over on this side. It was a cozy, family-style place to go to work. So, but we saw all the fireworks in that headquarters. So that was the other thing we had to overcome. That was Yeoman's job. And little by little, we started to overcome it. And little by little, the product guys recognized that this was a good thing to do. All of them, even Hancock, finally recognized that the profit margins for all of this activity were rather attractive. And that's how train export grew all the way into joint venture development, which was Ron Slay's job. Remember, Ron Slay had the job of joint ventures and something or other. And when I came back in the train company, I worked for Ron. And so that brings us up to around 1980, when American Standard bought the train company. American Standard's business was where?
At least half was overseas.
Half of it was overseas.
No, 75%.
Europe? Yeah, 70%. That's the reason I never put numbers up in these things. Somebody always picks at them. Anyway, and Wabco was a German company, basically. Westinghouse Air Brake Company. It spun off a German company. So they were very international. And they drove further development of international. But they said, and enlightened trained people like Rob said, we gotta have a plan. And that brings us to Boston Consulting Group. And the enlightened
in the Pacific Rim. Yeah, Bob spent basically 2 years doing Boston Consulting Group in North America first, then in Europe. We worked together, then in Unitary. And that was Roth who really initiated it. I think maybe, I don't know whether he was planning to sell the company or not, but about a couple of years later, American Standard bought the company. And when American Standard bought the company, their main question to, by then, Jim Workman was the president of the company. And the question was, either air conditioning is completely different from all the other industries we know, or you're missing an opportunity. Because Asia was booming and we had almost no business in Asia. So he put together a strategy team, which was called the Pacific Rim Study. Bob was the VP of planning for the corporation. Or were you in CD? I don't know. Well, anyway, they put together with I was at the time in Clarksville in the Unitary business, commercial, in the light commercial. And basically the heads of strategy, the leaders of the business units, we created a team. Jim was in it too, and I don't know if George was. And we spent about 6 months putting together what is called the Pacific Rim Strategy. The Pacific Rim Strategy basically answered their question by saying, you are absolutely right, we are missing an opportunity. And we presented a proposal to make a major investment. I will tell you later in the anecdotes that George, Jim, and I went to a dinner at David Smith's house because David Smith was selected to be the vice president of this new group. And we were supposed to move to Osaka. So he invited us to his house for a dinner which we called the Black Mass, and I'll tell you later.
But don't forget the wives.
And the ladies too, of course. And what happened is that they had a plan to announce David Smith as the new vice president of this group. And like 2 days before they announced, David Smith quit. So Workman doesn't know what to do with this. So he decided that he had 2 stray younger people who maybe could do this. So he created with those weird names like EMA and AAZ, and Danielle Hilger ended up with Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and I ended up with Asia, America Zone. And that was the beginning of, but American Standard was really willing to invest and to allow us to develop the strategy and play the game out. That started really in 1985. And essentially we followed this evolution of stages, because one of the things that Jim probably didn't, because it's not meant to be detailed, you really can't design products if you don't know what the market, many customers need. So you need to be able to find segments and characteristics. And for that you need a lot of experience. So you have to build a marketing organization that not only supports sales, but that acquires knowledge and becomes really insightful as to where you position your products. Well, each one of these has an evolution for each one of the functions. I won't spend any time, but if you give me the next chart for a second, then I'm going to be very short, because all of you live this, so it's not so. So these are sort of the stages. From the 60s until 1971, the export sales grew to $50 million. That was the main driver of growth, what Jim was explaining. Then, with the investment in France and their new factories, and the manufacturing subsidiaries became the drivers of growth. You know, the growth is still fairly high, 20 compounded annual growth rate of 25, and the international reached about $100 million by 1974, which is when the Pacific Rim study took place. Then, sorry, that was 10 years before. Then in the 70s, you may remember there was the oil shock, and the prices went up, and the Middle East ended up very rich, and they started building enormous cities and all kinds of stuff. And the driver of this part of the growth here was the oil boom, mostly in the export subsidiaries, although there was a horrible competition between the export and manufacturing. It was really a free-for-all, and there were battles, there were people who hated each other. The commission disputes were probably at the peak, and if there had been any rockets at the time, we would have had missiles going between the Middle East and Europe and all that, because they absolutely hate, they all tried to grab the jobs for themselves. But this is the oil boom growth until we got to this stage where, and I combine the word sold and old. We sort of returned to the old train where, you know, the domestic part was really important, international was not. And I guess Ralph was sort of in this transition of whether he sold, he didn't sell. And you can see that growth really stalled for a few years. And then at 1985, the Pacific Rim study came and allowed, or those who had been selected to invest, to develop, all of you, many of you participated. And for a period of about 15 years, the growth rate went up significantly to 13% on the business. By the time that, that Bill Kluge sort of retired, which is about $1 billion in TIG, we reached our first $1 billion in 1999. And of that, about 650 million were in Asia. So Asia was the big driver. Oh, sorry. No problem.
It's not for your girlfriend, is it?
Oops.
Sorry. Okay, and then, American Standard sort of went through two stages. Mano Campos was truly an internationalist, and then he retired, and then we end up in another American Standard, which I don't know anything about because I left. So William is going to tell you about it.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much for giving me this assignment last night. So I was not prepared, and I need to read some of my memories that were really deep inside. I need to refresh, to share with you what happened during Pose's era, and a little bit after Ingersoll Rand. In fact, it was the continuation. In my opinion, Fred Pose did a continuation of our strategy with an increased focus in shareholder value. Mm-hmm. Okay, his main thing was not sales growth, but was shareholder value. In the beginning, when he arrived, let's understand what was North America. North America was an equipment sales organization. They have fat cows and 3 guys that manufacture chillers, handling units, and unitary. Every office did whatever they wanted. there was absolutely no consistency between offices in North America. So every office manager was the king of his area. He did his sales process as he wanted. He did service or didn't do service, was absolutely optional to them. However, Fred Poses have two main priorities in the beginning. Safety was one of them, and you can see that his culture of safety lasts to today. If I remember right, when we begin to have the measurements of safeties, train have hundreds of reportable accidents a year. Hundreds. At the end, in the middle, to the end, when you have a reportable accident, you will have an interview with him personally. Nobody wanted to have that.
That was also considered an accident.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was really difficult because he was very straight with that. And the second focus yes, was good.
You covered it. Right there. It took years.
Took years, many years. Was productivity with Six Sigma. So, and he went ballistic with Six Sigma. I remember meetings with him and I said, you talk with the others about Six Sigma. I am one Sigma. I don't have systems to go to Sigma. And he really invested a lot in productivity. So, when you look to that situation of North America, he decided, you know, I don't know his conversation with Schultz, but I believe it was not nice.
Yes.
And his strategy, when I was presenting as Latin America, was not anymore an opportunistic exporter. We want to have permanent presence everywhere. So you want to produce locally products designed for your market. So if you want to be a region, Latin America region, you need to have a design center, you need to have manufacturing centers, and you don't have any of that. International is an opportunistic opportunistic word. He said, we want to become global. And so if you want to be a region, you want to have a design center. At that moment, I asked for Jim Schultz and Fred Kaut's help. I said, I cannot do this, I will disappear. Can I be absorbed by North America? And Jim Schultz said yes. Fred Kautz said yes, with two conditions. Never do a sales conference in Miami in August because it's hard to play golf. And you continue to do your thing. Don't bother. You do your thing in Latin America and...
Is this fiction? Is this fiction or real?
No, real. Absolutely real. And then I become part of the Schultz organization. So I believe also Fred saw a lot of waste with iOS and WSG at that time. You know, we have two account systems, account teams, two HR teams in every region of the world, even if you don't have markets. So it was very difficult, very easy for him to see the waste. So he consolidated WSG and iOS a little bit after he fired Schultz. And because Schultz allowed me to be part of the America organization, I begin to leverage his resources. So for example, I remember we put one person with price management in some one hyper organization. By the way, some continue to do the same thing to this day. He managed large jobs. No. And another guy was to be with Fred Schaefer, how to manage inventory of unitary equipment throughout Latin America. A little bit into the journey with Poses being the president of Train, he invited Conover to become the head of North America, in fact of Americas, with a specific task to drive consistency and productivity. And what Conover did, he looked at Latin America and said, I like your structure. So he created 4 territories in North America, replicating what Latin America did. And he began to drive consistency to every office. So this is how we sell. This is how we do service. This is how you must have 3-part stores. It's not optional. You have big markets. So a lot of increased visibility on service, parts, other products, contracting, begin to grow. And he really drove that consistency to a level, leveraging the acquisition of Train offices in North America. The people that have what we call franchises were getting old, and there was the opportunity to acquire many offices every month. So they put a team to do the acquisition of the old franchisees. And when they acquire, they go with the business processes that were defined for North America. During that journey, we still were doing a little bit of diking. And just to share with you, I believe I was the killer, actual killer of the diking meeting, the diking deal. There was one day that we were set to sign the agreements about a Latin America joint venture. After months of reading drafts, preparing drafts, discussing drafts. And we have a meeting scheduled for Vancouver. And I went there with Paul McGrath, that was the general counsel for American Standard at that time. And it was a 3-day meeting. Diking, how you say, they postponed, they asked questions. We never got to the point to discuss the signing of the agreement. And then on the end of the second day, I told Paul, if you know me a little bit, I have a big mouth. I told him, I'm going back, I will not stay to the end of the meeting. We never made to the point of signing the agreement. I'm going out because I have my MBO. I need to do my living, and here, this deal will never happen. These guys are not serious. They don't want to deal with us. I went back, and a few years later, when Paul McGrath retired, he called me on the morning of his last day. He said, William, I owe you an apology. When you said that, and I have some antecedents in having some bad meetings with Diking, he said, I told to Fred that you were an emotional leader, not irrational, and not too objective on your business.
Nice guy, huh?
But he had the honesty to call me and say, I was wrong.
Yeah.
And I owe you an apology. You were the only guy left in that organization that saw that that deal will never happen.
Called a spade a spade.
So, because I have a big mouth, one day I told Fred Poses, I have several anecdotes about that I will not spend time. You don't understand our business. And he said, oh yeah? Why you don't do the next strategic meeting? I said, done, I will take over that. So then I asked Danilo, it was me and Danilo, and we have like 2-3 months to prepare a global strategy for trade. That the fundamentals was everything that we discussed during years. global presence, local manufacturing, value of service. And we had like 200 people, maybe a little bit more from all the globe. And with that, doing the GE change acceleration process, because he was a GE guy and we learned this could be effective. So we need to neutralize some of the newcomers that everybody talked here that were disablers. So we assigned people to convince that disablers to be part of our team. So we have people working with Shelley London and with Sally Hobling and a few other disablers, one-to-one, to bring them to our side. And the main thing we did, I think, Danilo, besides everything we did in TIG, was the increased focus on service. So immediately after that meeting, he hired Larry Walsh to become a US service leader, and he said, I don't want too much product manufacturing goal increase. I want to make a lot of money in service, because they acquire the service organization from the North American offices, and he began to see the opportunity to increase service in a profitable way. And if you heard what they said yesterday, today 33% of train business is service. And I just looked yesterday with someone, when you see increased profitability, and perhaps shows a little bit of the increase with Ingersoll Rand. Today, train market cap value is $95 billion. Train is 60. No, the other way around. Train
you're right,
is
you're right.
95 billion and carrier is 60 billion. So we are 1.5 times more valuable than carrier today. We are more valuable than Johnson, a lot more valuable than Daikin. So, and I think this increased shareholder approach started with Fred Poses. He was adamant about that. So then come the final days of Fred Poses. He sold American Standard. He spin off Vapco, and train was independent again for 30 days. He made a lot of money on that. I think he was the fifth.
He was number one.
The number 5 CEO in.
It's 128 million.
128. He was on the top list of the people that make more money. But then IR acquired us, and it was a different journey, because IR at that time, they have Club Car, they have Ingersoll Rand compressors, they have Schlag, the locks, they have Hussmann, they have Thermo King, and now they have Train. And shortly after they acquired, they created a division that was called Climate Solutions. That was everything that had a compressor was consolidated. So Hussmann, Thermo King, and Train were part of that division. And that division was global. Latin America, North America, Europe and Middle East, and Asia and China. I don't remember if China was one. You remember? I don't.
They were one.
So, but because this group began to develop talent, they leveraged what we left, and they just have a few people that were established in the region, but not expats. In fact, Fred Poses started that. He didn't like expatriates. So he brought some people from GE, from Alliance Signal, to be the leaders of Asia, Europe, and IR, that was a global company already, leveraged that. So a lot of people that breed seed. Today are leaders in train technologies. So José La Logia, that was a train guy, Jaime Jimenez, Carlos Gonzalez, Jorge Ordonez, Marcelo Martinez, a lot of trained people succeeded within Ingersoll Rand and now with train technology. So, in train technology, Ingersoll Rand have the ability to invest, and they were willing to invest if you have a good project with a good return. I asked several times for a lot of money, and they really supported acquisitions. For you to invest, once I asked $8 million to build a boom, to do a boom, a build, own, operate, and maintain job. He said, do it. I could not find one customer, but I have the okay to do it. And then, even within IR, we start to change engineering. So engineer was always in La Crosse, and he began to develop an engineering center in China and one in Bangalore, India. So for North America markets, I believe most of the design are here, but some might be done in Bangalore. And for China is designing products, as you said, specifically to the Chinese market. And my last project there was to do, I convinced them that we have no future in fighting with variable refrigerant flow. And I tried to do a variable water flow that is a small chiller similar to a variable refrigerant, but we needed to develop controls. And I remember Pete Cotlaret and Randy Newton could not finish that product successfully, and that idea died. Then I retired in 2012, and I don't know anything after 2012.
Thank you very much. Okay, now it's time to share stories that you have about your past. There is no format. You just stand up and tell the story. Some of you have My name is Robert Canfield, and I have frequently been called to meetings like this where you want to have a popular discussion without any level of concern. So I'm going to explain the beginning of this story of train. Could you please, where's the control?
The control is there.
Go.
It's not gift to Rob.
One more. Okay.
Good afternoon, Tiggers, all right?
Okay, so good afternoon, Tiggers. One more, please. We're going to be talking about the history of Train International. And all of you who were process organization and experts in this strategy know that the value chain is a really powerful way to think about the business. So I'm going to use the value chain to explain very quickly what all of you know, and I won't go through details. The value chain is the best way to think about organizational development. And essentially, the stages from starting a company in just North America to becoming a global player has multiple stages. I won't go through everything, but here you have sales, marketing, service, the front end of the value chain, and in the back, products, which includes engineering and development, and manufacturing. And there is a stage here going from red, like the traffic lights, you're stopped and you're not doing very much. Please click. Into a little bit more yellow, you start moving a little bit, go through. Then you start doing some more stuff, go through. And then it begins to get into green. And then finally at the end, you're fully green. You might say, well, what the hell did you tell us? Well, Jim Munch is going to explain some of the things that have led through the beginning of this. I will handle the middle of the journey, and then William Seckel would do the last part of the journey. What is the journey? Essentially, Train International started about 75 years ago, about the same age as some of us. And the question is, how did this baby grow up and reach its relative maturity today? So I leave now as a consultant, and I go to my other job.
Okay, it's hard to follow.